All right, welcome back from lunch. Did y'all have a good lunch? Pretty good? Yeah. All right, we're going to get started now with the public notification rule and what we will see, because we've already gone over the lead and copper and the chemical contaminant. We'll see a lot of the breakdowns again in this particular rule here. The time frames. In other words, when there is an exceedance of the maximum contaminant level, how long do I have before I have to notify the public that there is a problem? So we'll specify all of that during this rule here. So we're looking at defining the public notification rule. We're going to discuss the regulatory overview because that is the blueprint, and we'll identify requirements of that particular rule. Now, prior to the Safe Drinking Water Act, what do we do as far as notifying the public? Did we make a big effort to let them know exactly what was going on in their water? Not at all, not at all. Do you think that it's wise to alert the public and notify them when there are issues with their water? Absolutely, because now they have the information, the knowledge to make informed decision as to whether or not this is a water source for their use, especially if they are very young, very old, or have a compromised immune system. We need them to know exactly what's in their water so they can make informed decisions. So the public prior to the Safe Drinking Water Act was not kept informed of the things that will affect their decision regarding their water. So hence the public notification rule was put into play. This way, customers are always aware of the problems with their drinking water. Now, how do we notify the public? We say that they're always aware. How do we make them aware? Is there a uniform way that we can get the information out to them? Okay, door-to-door, website, CCR, absolutely. Consumer Confidence Report. These are just ways that we can make sure that we get the information out to them. So the public notification rule provides consumers with problems with their drinking water that will pose a health risk. It also alerts the public when we fail to comply with the standards, when we receive that notice of violation. We also have to notify them when we fail to test the water. In other words, we're supposed to pull a monthly microbial sample. And let's say for whatever reason forgot to do it. Hopefully you're never in that situation where you have done that in the past, but you have to notify the public when you fail to do that also. We're going to notify them any granted variances. Variances is that less costly technology that Bo mentioned earlier. Bo, right? Mm-hmm. Excellent, mentioned earlier. Or if there is an exemption. An exemption simply means that the agency, state agency, or EPA has given you a longer time to comply with whatever was in your monitoring requirements initially. So it does not make it go away. When you get that exemption, it does not say, all right, you no longer have to do any chlorine residual. No, it gives you a longer time period to comply with it. All right, in 2000, the notification rule was revised, and this revision said that not only do you have to tell the public when there are issues with their water, now you got to give them a description of the issue, the violation. What contaminant are we talking about? What were the levels that were identified? Okay, what date that this sample happened on? In addition to that, you want to give them a little more information, potential adverse health effect from the violation or the situation. And again, remember that very specific language that we looked at with the lead and copper? That is in place for every exceedance. You want to make sure, again, that you're using the language that they suggest. And then you also want to point out what population is at risk. Is it the very old? Is it the very young? Is it the compromised immune system patients? So make sure they're well aware of this. Other things to include that were part of the revisions in 2000 was that you need to let them know whether or not an alternate source of water should be used. In other words, you may want to, in this case, depending on what the contaminant, tell them bottled water, is one alternative. The actions that they should take if they need to seek medical help is another revision to the rule, as well as the actions to correct the violation. In other words, what are we doing? Okay, as a system, what is in place to mitigate the contaminant? We're going to give them an expected time to return to compliance. So during this time, we want the public to continue to use the alternate source of water or boil their water or whatever you've put in place for them to do until this expected time. Now, after that expected time, we run the analysis, the results come back fine. Guess what? We have to then re-notify the public the same way the initial notification was made, lifting whatever issue that was in place. Okay. Now, we also want to provide the public with the name, business address, phone number of the water system. Now, as far as the name, right now, was it William or Kenneth that you prefer to go by? Will, okay. Right now, Will may be the manager of this particular system. And so instead of putting Will's name down, how about put the position? Just in case when Will is promoted, they're not calling to talk to Will, which is no longer his area, but they can talk to whoever is in that position. Does that make sense? So a position may be an alternative to an actual name, especially if you have people that come and go. And you want it to be someone who can answer their questions also or point them in the right direction. And then you want a statement including that encourage your customers to spread the word, help you get that word out to other people that are in the less populated area about the water source if they're still on the system. Okay. So it can be, again, a posting such as this one for boil water. Can be one way we can get that notification out, or such as this one here. The other one was for boiled water, but this is because from time to time our receiving streams are tested for E. coli or fecal coliform, and when the count is too high, you may want to put the notice up telling swimmers don't swim in the water because elevated counts of whatever. All right, the regulatory changes. So that's the overview, regulatory overview. Now let's look at the changes. Now, in the with the old rule, used to be you had 72 hours to get this out to the public. The new change is instead of the 72 hours, how long now do you have to notify the public for acute or tier 1? You have 24 hours. 24 hours to get that notification to the public. And that's on page 7-4. Okay. So 24 instead of the 72 for violation posing acute health risk to short-term exposure. 24 hours. Now before you notify the public, you got to do what though? Notify who? Notify your state. Don't go notify the public without their blessing. So we notify the state. They give us the language, the wording that they would like for us to use, and then we proceed with notification of our customers. So consult with the state or EPA within 24 hours of a tier 1 violation. And we'll be very specific as to what constitute a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 violation. Okay. Now for tier 2 violation, EPA says there is a 30-day notice for other serious violation that is no immediate threat to human health. That falls under the tier 2. However, in Delaware, that 30-day is not there. Your stipulation in Delaware is 14 days. Got it right from the state agency. So in your book, whereas again, that's on 7.4 at the bottom of the page, where it says 30-day, you may want to put that your state is more stringent. Your state is 14 days. Now EPA is the parent. In other words, we all fall up under EPA, but each individual state or territory has the right to be more stringent than the EPA. And when they are more stringent, you must abide by the most stringent. And for Delaware, for Tier 2s, it's a 30-day notice. For Tier 3s, non-serious violations, EPA says 12 months. That's on the top of 7-5, 12 months. Do you think Delaware maintains that 12 months? It's more stringent. Do you know what Delaware is for your Tier 3s? Living in Delaware, you need to be aware. It is 90 days. Bump, bump. You're absolutely right. 90 days. So your state is a lot more stringent than EPA. So we still have the 24 hours, 14 days for Delaware for the Tier 2s, and 90 days for the Tier 3. Now with the Tier 3, EPA says since you have a 12-month window before you notify people, since it's a non-serious violation, you can put that on your consumer confidence report. That's that annual report that's due July 1st every year, by July 1st every year. So for some notification, you can just simply put it there. And hopefully the public is picking that form up and they're actually reading it, because that's their form of notification for non-serious violation. So any questions on the tiers? Yes, sir?
No, what I have to do, because of the Barbara area, I have to notify all the realtors because of the rental properties.
Right.
They're in contact with the homeowner, so they act as the middle person to, and all of the contacts they get contacted because of all the rental tenants.
Right, but you have to make that contact with the owner because they're the ones responsible,
Right.
ultimately responsible for the place. Excellent. All right, the other regulatory changes, you need to provide simplified standard language. In other words, we need to understand what we're telling the public. The public needs to understand it. Again, the existing standard health effects, simplified in everyday layman's terminology where they can understand what's going on. New standard language is now required for monitoring violation. Public notices are also encouraged in order to look at the standardized templates that they have available out there. So simplify. Another change, streamline your delivery of notices. Under the old rule, you have to provide multiple streams of getting the information out there. In other words, you may have put the door tag, you may have mailed it, put it in a newspaper, on the radio station. Again, several different ways to ensure that you've reached your customer. Now they say that you can select a single minimum method for each tier from a regulatory list and take any additional steps on your own choosing to make sure that you're reaching the population that you're serving. So they're giving you more leeway there on how you disseminate the information. The other change, you need to certify with the state primacy agency within 10 days to show that you've met all the requirements for public notification. In other words, I've met the 24 hours or the 14 days in your case, or the 90 days letter of certificate to the state showing that. Okay. Any questions about the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 time frame for notification? None? All right, well, let's look at what constitute a tier 1 violation. Let's look at our microbial samples. Each of you ought to collect those monthly BACT samples, right? All right, we send it in, we get a positive total coliform. What's the first thing we have to do? Okay, set up for our repeat sets, right? They too come back positive for total coliform. Now, is that a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 violation? The initial sample is positive for total. The repeat, positive for total. Which tier do you think that falls under? Okay, I've got a tier 1, tier 1, tier 1, tier 1. Can I kind of paint your picture a little? Color it in? That will be a tier 2. Yeah, why is it a tier 2? Total coliform, positive, total coliform, positive. What's missing? Or what's not there that would make it a tier 1? Your total coliforms are naturally occurring. In other words, they're already in the water, the soil, the air. And it's not from intestinal waste. So that group is not considered a tier 1 or an acute risk. Okay? And so they fall in the second tier.
You have detection of either E. coli or something else, right?
Absolutely, very good. So when there is a positive total followed by a positive E. coli or fecal coliform, that bumps it to the tier 1 because now I have intestinal waste. If I have a positive E. coli, positive fecal followed by a positive total, still tier 1, why? Intestinal waste. So whenever you have the fecal or the E. coli, that's what bumps it up to that tier 1, which now there is an immediate threat to health because there is a risk of disease. I don't know that it's there, but because of the intestinal waste or the fecal contamination, there is a risk. Make sense? So anytime fecal E. coli positive, that's what constitutes a tier 1. If you have a nitrate or nitrite NCL exceedance with confirmed samples taken within 24 hours, so just like the BACTs, I'm collecting my initial sample, I'm retesting within a 24 hours, and if it's positive, that's a tier 1 for nitrate nitrites. So that's something they take very serious, 24 hours notification. If I have an exceedance of my NCL for my non-community water system, and that was greater than 10 milligrams per liter, that is a tier 1. If my MRDL for chlorine dioxide is exceeded, that's a tier 1. And that MRDL is a 1 milligram per liter. When I've exceeded that, that's a tier 1. Why? Because above 1, it's going to create byproducts, chloride, chlorates, which are hazardous to our health. If the turbidity from my plant is greater than 5 NTU, that's a tier 1, immediate notification within 24 hours. Any treatment technique exceedance where the primacy agency determines that falls under tier 1. In other words, they got a little leeway here, so it doesn't have to be any of the ones we aforementioned, but anything that they say, hey, you've exceeded, and we think this is critical to our area, they can deem it as a tier 1. If you have any occurrences of a waterborne disease, or if you have E. coli, Enterococcus, or coliphage in your groundwater source, that's a tier 1. Because number 1, none of these bacteria should be present in a groundwater source. Usually they are filtered out during the process of the water matriculating down the soil levels. Any other violations with significant adverse health effect falls under the tier 1s. So with tier 1s, it poses an acute risk to the public, so I have 24 hours to notify them. How am I going to notify them? Okay, here are the possible methods of notification. You can get that information to the television stations, the radios, websites can be another one. post it in public areas or hand deliver it to your customers, but you have to choose one that will reach most of your customers. So, tier 2s. Tier 2s, any maximum contaminant level or MRDLs or treatment techniques not covered under tier 1. So in other words, anything that we didn't mention in tier 1s will fall under tier 2s if it's an exceedance of a limit that's established by EPA. Violation of primacy agency determines. Here again, they have some leeway to put just about anything under this tier 2. Failure to comply with terms of a variance or an exemption. In other words, they give you 6 months to comply or to build something. And if it's not done, such as a treatment technique or something, then you have to notify your public within how many days for EPA?
14.
Okay, for Delaware 14, EPA 30. Now, I'm stressing both because this is based on the Safe Drinking Water Act, but I do want you all to be aware that your laws are more stringent, okay? And of course, if you hit the stringent one, you would have satisfied EPA. So if you have the 14-day, EPA is a breeze there. If you have a groundwater system and it fails to maintain a 4-log inactivation for viruses for more than 4 hours, that's a tier 2. Failure to take corrective actions with a state-approved plan or within a certain time frame, that's a tier 2. And again, repeated failure to conduct monitoring for cryptosporidium. This is not looking at the result, this is just the monitoring. So failure to do that falls under tier 2. And you have to say, hi public, hi customer, we screwed up. We didn't do this particular monitoring. Now how do you think, or what do you think that would do to the confidence of your consumer when you're getting notifications like this? Actually, I ran into a gentleman at lunch, and he saw my little name, and he was like, oh, what are you here for? And I told him what I was here for, and he said, oh, so you can tell me what's in the Lewes water, what's going on there? And I'm like, I don't know. And so he said, can anyone come to the training? Sure, come on. We're over here. So evidently something is going on, enough for him to have written something down, whereas he has questions, and that's a good thing. Now we can tell him where to go to get those questions from, because we want them informed of what's going on with the water. Okay.
My systems are pretty lax. I mean, they really are. The customers are, summertime, it's hectic, but the wintertime, I might have 1,000 people on their beach all year round.
Yeah.
But over to the industrial side, our largest river, Georgetown, we missed it. Around that, I went in, and of course, you hear signs that say, I talked to you.
Yes.
I guess you'll not do that no more, will you? Down here, it's pretty laid back, unless there's something, you come out and you tell them you gotta start boiling the water and.
That's when you
then they
start
get
having
nervous.
the issues.
Then they
Okay.
start getting really
Or
nervous.
in what I've noticed in the past where you have retired communities and they have a lot of time to read everything that comes through there, they're the ones that, in my opinion, in my experience, they really get involved, okay? Because they read all of it, all the I's dotting and T crossing, and they really come up with some questions for you. So if you have a group like that, you'll probably have a lot of interest. The other time we saw a great influx in the people that had lots of questions when we first started with the CCRs back. Yes, it was around 99. It was 96 is when the first went out, but we had 3 years to comply. But when we sent those out the first time in 99, oh man, you're talking about the number of questions because it was something new. What has happened since then, for the majority of people, the newness is worn off. And a lot of times that CCR, unfortunately, you're absolutely right. I don't even look at it, it's like, but we want to still be able to put the information out there so we can say we did due diligence. We made a good faith effort to inform them. Okay? We want to make sure that you're doing that. So when they come back 20 years later and there's a news camera in front of them saying, okay, there's radioactive material in my water. Yeah. Did you not read your CCR 1996, 99, and so forth on like that? It's been reported. We're not trying to hide anything. It's naturally occurring. So you will have cases like that that'll come back because all of a sudden now someone's reading it. And we want our customers informed. All right. Tier 2 notification for our community water systems, mail and hand delivery. And again, any additional method to reach the customer is not likely to receive from the above two methods. They're leaving that up to the discretion of the entity to determine that. For non-community system, post it. You saw the posting. Now post it in a public area. Don't post it in the bulletin board at the end of the beach where no one ever goes, or any place that you can think of that no one ever visits. For instance, don't post it here at this business here, thinking that the majority of consumers will come. You want to make sure you're posting it at a place that's frequented by people. You can mail it, you can hand delivery, or any other method to reach the customers that's not likely to receive from the above three methods. So 14 days, Delaware standards for Tier 2, 30 days, EPA standards for Tier 2. Tier 3 notification is any monitoring violations, failure to comply with the established testing procedures. In other words, it's not an approved method. If it's not an approved method, they don't have to accept the results. So again, that's a violation. You must use approved methods. You must comply with the proper sampling technique. That too is a part of it. Availability of unregulated contaminant monitoring results. Remember earlier I told you that yes, there are so many chemicals that are 65 chemical contaminants that we regulate. There are some that are not regulated at this point, but EPA is gathering the information. In other words, they have some areas monitoring these unregulated chemicals. They're doing the research to see what adverse health risks are involved with these contaminants. So you got to make sure that you have those monitoring results when that is one that's on your list. Or an exceedance of the secondary maximum contaminant level for fluoride for community systems. The maximum contaminant level for fluoride secondary, what was that limit? 4 for your primary and 2 for your secondary. So if you have a community system exceeding the 2, that is one that will fall under the Tier 3, which means you have 90 days. Delaware has 90 days to notify the public of that exceedance. EPA will allow 12 months. And that's something especially that some families are very sensitive to, since fluoride is in the toothpaste and all. Yes, sir, Will?
I got a question, and this has been on my mind for a while. Delaware and Maryland are interconnected, so we have an interconnected system. Delaware feeds the fluoride. Fluoride comes into Maryland. Maryland does not require be regulated or tested. And I've talked to MDE about this numerous times, and to me, I would think it would be if they do not require to even test for it.
Okay, and that may be true, but they still have to do, is it a surface or groundwater system?
Groundwater.
Groundwater. That means they have to provide testing at least once every 3 years, okay, for that contaminant. And that's all that they are required under the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Under the EPA regulation.
Right, under the EPA. Now, as a state, again, they're looking at it, and if it's not an issue for them as a state, then the primacy agency has the authority not to even look at the secondary standards that may be in place. Yeah. And if you all are feeding it, what level are you feeding it?
We're feeding it to maintain what? Delaware.
Okay.
So I'd say
And
it's through
so-
an interconnection.
Huh?
It's through an interconnection into Maryland.
Right, so they're ending up with something, once it gets to Maryland. But again, if it's under 4, that may be the reason why they're not even testing for it outside of that every 3 years. Because they are required once every 3 years to test for it. And so your response, they just pretty much not a big deal?
Yeah, that's the response.
Yeah. I wonder if they have it naturally occurring or if it's enhancing it for them. Because again, some states see it as an enhancement.
I mean, we've never had to notify the public in Maryland to use it.
Okay.
And it's not naturally occurring in the Maryland wells.
Okay. And that brings up another question. Because of that interconnect, when there is an exceedance, let's say in Delaware, do you have to notify the customers in Maryland?
Yeah, we've been through that with total collar formula.
Okay.
We've already worked that out. We ran into that problem with which wells were operating at the time on a huge system.
So your wells, where did it come from?
We figured it was bad sampling, but we still had to monitor whatever wells were on at
Right, do the source monitoring. In addition, that's because of the new coliform rule that's in place.
How many samples?
32.
And you have to do all of them that were in operation at the time that the positive occurred. Yeah. Yeah, that's thanks to the coliform rule. All right, we're looking at the same notification methods for your Tier 3's mailing, hand delivery, or any other that deemed necessary to get the information to the customers, non-community system posting, mailing, and again, any other method necessary to get the information out there. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, issues with public notification? You got it down pat? So Tier 1's required notification within what time frame? 24 hours. 24 hours, and we're going to notify who first? The state or EPA. Excellent. And the reason I say EPA, there are 2 states without primacy. All right. What about Tier 2s? EPA standard for Tier 2s, 30 days. What's Delaware's standard for 2D? 14. Tier 3s, EPA standard, 12 months. Delaware standard, 90 days. Okay. What constitute a Tier 1 that we're most familiar with and probably will encounter more than any of the other violations? And you think about, well, what do I do more frequently? The monthly back-to sample, always a possibility because of the frequency if nothing else. So when I have fecal, E. coli positive, automatically acute risk. Anything else that will constitute an acute risk, outborn of waterborne disease, outbreak of waterborne diseases, that's an acute risk. So think in that line. Total falls up under Tier 2s. Anything else non-serious, Tier 3s. Okay, excellent. No questions? Right, we're going to go on to the next topic then, which is the radionuclide rules. And we'll see a lot of this we actually caught earlier today with the chemical contaminant rule. Who remembers the 4 radionuclides that we're testing for? It was up there earlier. I did mention it, but let's see how good your recall is. There were 4 of them.
Radium.
Okay, radium, good. Radium 226, 228, that's one group. Excellent.
Uranium.
Uranium added in 2000, excellent. First, super. Gross alpha, what comes after alpha?
Beta.
Beta, excellent, you got all four. So those are the ones that we're talking about in this chapter. So at the end of completion of this module, you'll be able to define, which you already know, the components of it as far as what we're looking for, testing for. We'll talk about the maximum contaminant levels. What do you think the goal will be for all of these? Zero. Because any of them that are present will pose a risk. So we're going to look at the regulatory overview, the health effects of radionuclides, as well as various methods for compliance of this particular rule. All right, radioactive materials enter the water in several ways. We mentioned this earlier. 80% of them are what? They're naturally occurring. They are naturally occurring. They're deposited in the surface water from the air. They enter the groundwater, again, through seepage, erosion. Human activities can be a component. And we say the human activity only constitute about 20%. Mining, farming, stormwater, industrial activity, or dissolving from underground mineral deposits as the water flows over them, being the universal solvent, picking them up. So, 80% natural sources, rock, soil, cosmic radiation from space, and radon gas. 20% from the man-made sources. And you know, a lot of people think just the opposite, because they think, well, everybody dumped in the old days and didn't pay attention to where they dumped or how they treated the site, so now we're all infected because of the waste that was put in the ground that infiltrated our groundwater, naturally occurring. Nuclide definition. Nuclides are an atomic form of an element, characterized by the number of protons and neutrons in the center and what's in that outer shell. Protons are positive, so I need something negative in it. Negative. Neutrons are neutrally charged. Electrons, super. The electrons are in the outer shell there. So the radionuclide is an unstable form of the nuclide. Radionuclide, again, remember it's trying to reach stability, is the unstable form of that. And you can, again, resource their Office of Air and Radiation for more information. Now, how does this rule affect us? First of all, we're going to look at the health effect. Now, whether or not you're looking at combined radium-226, 228, or the gross alpha, or the beta particle, or uranium, if you look at the health effect for each of these, one of the things that they have in common is an increase in cancer risk. Increase in cancer risk. That's in all four. Uranium, the only other different things that they say in uranium also will result in toxic effect in the kidneys. So we have an increase in cancer, toxic effect on the kidney. And we're looking at, again, people who have over a number of years ingested or taken in drinking water that exceeds the maximum contaminant level. Okay. Requirements of the 2000 radionuclide rules. It's going to apply to all community water systems. Remember the 15 service connections or 25 individual on a year-round basis. And it is considered for proposal, for future proposal for your non-transient, non-community. They are currently exempt from the 2000 requirements. So who's exempt? The non-transient, non-community ones are exempt. But all community systems, it is applicable. They must abide by it. Right, the other addition to the 2000 radionuclide rule, they added uranium. Again, in your book, they talk about, they looked at a more stringent requirement initially, the cost associated with that, the health effect at that level, and then they decided that 30 micrograms per liter is sufficient as far as the maximum contaminant level. The goal is still 0. Why you shake your head on that, brother? Why you shake your head on that? Why? Think they were too lax?
Yeah.
Again, when they are putting these rules into effect, if you want to have your say, you know you can. Now, how much does that say? How much weight does it carry? But at least you would have voiced your opinion. There's a time period where you can write public comments and really tell them why or why not you think this may be a good idea. And the other part of the 2000 rule says that they want to make sure that all water entering the distribution system is tested. So that was the other component for the radium nuclides. All right, treatment options. We have ion exchange. We talked about the mixed bed and the other types of ion exchange earlier, the anion, the cationic. We have reverse osmosis, lime softening, green sand filtration, coagulation, and filtration. Out of all of those, reverse osmosis is effective in removing all fluororadionuclides.
Down to 0?
Huh?
Down to 0?
No, I think when you look at reverse osmosis, it's like down to 0.001. Yeah, so taking it all the way to the goal, no. And again, that will be different based on what type of RO system you have too. So you always refer back to the manufacturer as to what it is slated to remove. I do want to put that out there too. Because based on how your system is set up, you may, get down to that level, you may not get down to that level. Okay. There's something else and I just forgot what I was going to say. You have this in your book also, which is, again, just showing you the best available technology for your small system compliance. And IX is your ion exchange. And for your ion exchange, again, if you're looking at the 4 classes, reverse osmosis is the only one that will remove all 4, even at the point of use, reverse osmosis. Now the other one, and you all said you all have green sand filtration, it's good for removing the radium. But if you have uranium, gross alpha, and beta, maybe not a best available technology for removal of those. So when you are designing what type of treatment schematic you're going to have, you need to know the quality of your water. And based on the quality of your water, you may not need an RO system, if radium 226, 228 is your only problem, if you have no problems with those others. So you want to be prudent with coming up with the best technology to remove these or treatment options. Make sure you're weighing and you're looking at everything. Now, RO system can be very expensive, especially for small systems. Therefore, if I don't have an issue with alpha and beta particles, well, I go with an RO system. So know the quality of your water. How do I learn the quality of my water? Got to run the test, do the analysis. Yes?
Now, radium pretty much consistent throughout the whole country. Around here, it seems to go up and down.
Yeah, and then that's pretty much what you're going to have. It's going to depend on the soil, content of the soil in a lot of cases. And so that differs depending on where you are. We had a system in the Houston area that had quite a lot of the radium 226, 228. But right next door at another system, not a problem with it. And so what that system ended up doing was abandoning that well, making sure it was sealed, and doing an alternative water source as opposed to removing. That's what they deemed finding an alternative source, which was digging another well, was more feasible to them than to have it removed. So you're gonna have people to set up the studies to figure out what works best for you, but any of these can vary depending on where you are and what type of a media or soil substrate you have throughout your layers. Well, that can change. Because in some of our system, fluoride's naturally occurring. We have one part of Texas, there's so much fluoride, we need to take it out of the water because it is causing the mottling of the teeth because it's so high. But again, you look on another side, and I'm not going to say east, west, south, or north, because I know exactly what I'm talking about. Another area, we're adding it. So all of these different contaminants can change based on where you are in your soil. For ground systems. Now for surface, most of this doesn't even apply because you're not going to have very high levels in surface water typically of these minerals, metals. Okay, are there any questions, comments, concerns, or issues on your radionuclide rules? Any of you all having that issue? Yeah, which one?
We have 2268 and we have 2 H-metals.
Okay, all right,
Now they're under 2. That's the contract.
okay. All right, if there's none, seems like it's time for a break.